And here we are for our first experimental podcast. What's happening, Russ?
We're going transcontinental here.
I'm holding down the mountain lair in Japan, and Russ is in another mountain lair.
Yes, in the upstate New York Adirondack region.
Wow.
Surrounded by mountains.
Yeah, I'm looking at his window behind him. It looks like it's dusk there, and here I am in the morning with the morning sun coming through the window. It's a very odd situation.
But hopefully things will go as usual. No technological glitches with all modern Wi-Fi technology here. Bringing you another episode as usual.
I really hope this works out because I do plan to one day record every week from a yacht and never touch land again for the rest of my life. So this is sort of a test run for that.
Yeah, in our later years, it would be nice to be somewhere around the Mediterranean. Maybe you on one side, me on the other.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Maybe at our adult music villa in Greece.
Yeah, it's really funny you pick Greece because I would pick Greece too. I don't know why. I think I just like the food or something, you know.
The food is nice, yeah.
I can eat a Greek salad every day. I love that.
Absolutely. But until those days, we'll keep on with our regular schedule, I guess. And this week it's episode 178 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
Before we roll into things, we want to give some thanks for last episode. First to Ovidiu Marinescu for sharing our episode last time. We featured his recording, Resurgence, New Works for Cello and Piano. That was on Navona Records with Noreen Cassidy Polera. If you haven't checked that recording out, go check it out for some contemporary cello and piano music that was really enjoyable. Also, we want to give thanks to trumpeter Bram Vanderglind. His recording Mirrors we featured in the last episode, and he shared the episode as well. So thanks, Bram, for that. This is his debut recording. Really good trumpet playing there. Interesting music. And I just want to give a general thanks to Positone Records for liking and also sharing one of our posts this week as well. We're going to be featuring some of their new recordings in an upcoming episode. Before we get into this week's episode, we've got a little bit of sudden bad news today, Mike.
Yeah, I heard about that. Good timing for the podcast, but sad timing for the world.
Just a couple of hours ago, browsing the jazz news, I saw that we lost jazz guitarist Russell Malone, who passed away today at the age of 60. He came up playing with Jimmy Smith and then with Harry Connick Jr. He became the guitarist for Diana Krall. He recorded 15 albums as a leader and recorded as a sideman for countless others, Houston Person, David Sanborn, Kenny Barron, Roy Hargrove, just to name a few. And he had a real soulful jazz style on the guitar that everyone seemed to enjoy. 60's too young, so we'd like to say rest in peace.
Tell me about it. That would give me a year left. I'm about to turn 59 over here.
Yes, so sad news there. But we've got some good music to liven the spirits this week in both classical and jazz. And in the episode description, you can find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon for all the music that we'll discuss. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. You can find our podcast on just about every podcast app and platform out there, but it doesn't look all neat and tidy everywhere you may find it. So if you can't see the full description or the recording links are not easy to follow, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us, and do tell a music-loving friend. Help us grow our audience. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a review, that also helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. Come on over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new release information throughout the week. The past 2 weeks have been really good Friday release days in jazz, so I put up a bunch of recordings that we'll probably get to in an upcoming episode, but we'll never get to everything, so you can get something new to listen to all the time. If you check us out there, you can see our interaction with the artists as well. You leave a message and comment there if you like. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to play some musical samples, as always, from the recordings we're going to talk about tonight. And this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. All that said, Mike, let's jump into the classical category. What do we have on the menu tonight?
Yeah, I should also mention, by the way, because the autumn classical releases have really started on Friday, so we're into that release season. Great. There's a lot of good stuff suddenly coming out. I'm still in the dog days of August here with these releases, and I've gone sort of a little off the beaten path as far as record labels go, and I really enjoy this because there are a lot of really great discoveries to be made here. The first album I'm going to be talking about tonight is one called Dolcissimo Sospiro, and of course, when you hear a title like that, I'm just right in there. You just can't keep me away from a recording called Dolcissimo Sospiro, which means a sweet breath or sigh or something like that. And this is sung by the soprano Céline Scheen and Philippe Pierlot on the viola da gamba. Both musicians are Belgian. And this is on the Flora Records label, the first time we're ever talking about them. They sent me a booklet, and I want to thank them for that. I haven't spoken to them in about 2 weeks now because we've had this on hold for a while. Anyway, this was released on July 12th, so it's a bit far back now, but had to do it. Anyway, the booklet that I received does not include notes about the program, only the texts for the sung songs, and they're all untranslated, so the Italian ones don't have an English translation, but most of them are in English anyway, and the Italian ones these days, we do have Google Translate. You can just hold your smartphone over the text and see the translation, but I'd rather have it side by side in a booklet, to be honest. It's just better that way. It's not like you're going to be wondering what they're singing about. You can always find out. Anyway, according to Flora Records' website, the theme of this album is the voice with the viola da gamba. Giulio Caccini, whose song, Dolcissimo Sospiro, we hear first, he's the title track, if you will, used to sing and accompany himself on the viol. And this was called cantare alla viola, the style. Okay, so you'd sing and play the viol at the same time. Sort of like the early Baroque version of, I guess, what Bob Dylan did. You'd sing a song and accompany yourself on the guitar. You know?
Right.
So I guess Giulio Caccini was an early version of that. And the cantare alla viola was considered the most beautiful way to awake the audience's emotions. And this era was all about the emotions. And I think we could use a bit of emotions. These are gentler emotions, of course. These aren't the histrionic emotions of 19th century opera. You know, they're a little more happy, sad, you know. Anyway. The album is mostly made up of English music because England provided us with the most exciting testimonies and revealed the fabulous embellishments that the great female singers of the time improvised. Several pieces for lyra viol played in the manner of the lyre, which means it's plucked, complement this program that weaves the connections between Italy and England at the dawn of the 17th century. And I also want to say, before I get into the music, I love the period painting on the album cover. It looks like a scene I would like to be involved in. It's some kind of elegant-looking woman sniffing some kind of flower there, and just looking really elegant and beautiful. You don't see her eyes. It's kind of cut off at her nose. Very interesting painting. The painting reflects the tastefulness we'll hear on this album. Okay, first, one of my favorite composers of the early Baroque, Giulio Caccini, with the sample track Dolcissimo Sospiro. Let's just get right into this. I'll sample this right away before I say anything about it. I had to get to that cadence at the end. It's so beautiful. And the singing is fantastic. And some of the qualities you'll notice are the sustain, the melisma, and that little bounce that the voice does and those little shaking sort of tremolos. They're all effects meant to evoke the emotions back in the time. So we heard the viola introducing the tune, and Scheen's voice comes in with a deep resonance to it. It's got some heaviness. I mean, she's a soprano, but she's not a soprano with a colorless voice that's really just going for the high notes. There's a lot of appealing quality to the shading that she can bring to these lines. It's an expressive voice with a lot of deep color to it. Beautiful melisma singing here, as you heard, in really what is a gorgeous song. You know, I could have really been in the courts of Italy listening to this music all day if I were born in the period. I think I could have been happy at that time, even though I probably would have only lived like 30 or 40 years. It would have been a 30 or 40 years, hopefully, filled with really good music. We should keep in mind this is a new style of music and was exciting at the time. Okay, so people would really just kind of be riveted to this sort of new style. The Renaissance was before this, and then this whole idea of drawing out the emotions with those little vocal patterns was something new, and it captivated people in Italy first, and then the rest of Europe, and then eventually, I guess, the rest of the world. Track 2, Tobias Hume. We're going to hear a British composer here. What Greater Grief? And this is an immediate example of the English piece for singer and lyra viol. Again, the viol plucked like a lyre. Again, let's hear a sample of this. Going for those high notes there. Now, Scheen is singing in English here and doesn't really have much of an accent. This is a pretty clear enunciation of the words, and you can understand them pretty well. English generally isn't a language that's kind to singers coming from another language, but I think we're pretty secure here in Scheen's vocals. Consonants come across satisfyingly strongly, and as with the Italian, each word is easily understandable without the text in front of you, assuming you know the language. Track 3, Tobias Hume, Touch Me Lightly, Tickle Me Quickly, Tickle, Tickle. Boy, that's a long title there. This is an instrumental track. It's played in the lyra viol style, and I'm going to sample this one too. Okay, so we've already heard quite a bit of variety on this album in only 3 tracks. At 2 minutes and 22 seconds or so, the instrumental changes to a new section that's bowed, making it sound like 2 different pieces in one. It reverts to a more dancing rhythm at the end. So by this point, we've heard all the styles the album will offer. We're now off to hear a variety of songs and instrumentals, and the solo here is song-like in its melody, satisfying in its low-toned melody. Track 4, back to Giulio Caccini, one of my favorite composers of the Baroque era. Dovrò dunque morire. I'm always happy to see his name on a program. All of his songs are gorgeous, drawing so much out of the voice via melisma, and once again, Scheen's singing is a pleasure to listen to. We hear bowed viol in accompaniment. Track 5, back to Tobias Hume, Love's Farewell. This is an instrumental, and here the viola da gamba is bowed, and I haven't sampled Pierlot playing solo bowed viola da gamba yet, so let's hear him. And let's bow out of that right about there. I love the calm space these pieces create, such an antidote to the age we live in. Track 6, an anonymous composition, Cruda Amarilli. This is an example of cantare al viola. The Italian works give a lot of opportunity for Scheen's vocal quality to shine, as it does here. I'm starting to notice that the sound of the viola da gamba is drawing out some of the quality of her voice. It would be different, probably lighter, with a harpsichord, so listen for that. Track 7, new composer here, Robert Jones. Not new, he's new on the recording. He is, of course, from the Baroque era. S'amor non è. This is back to cantare al viola. This almost feels like a continuation of the previous track. It's got similar effects and resolutions. The goal of these songs was to draw out vocally and instrumentally the emotions suggested by the text, and we're getting a good example of that here. Track 8, anonymous composition, The Dark is My Delight. Again, no pause between the tracks, but the language suddenly changes to English. Vowel sounds are more flattened, more E and I-like, as opposed to ah in Italian. It's a subtle change, but I have to commend the creative programming that lets us notice that. The viola is bowed in this piece. Track 9, Robert Jones, In Sherwood Lived Stout Robin. You always have these sort of woodland type titles in a lot of these old Baroque era and Renaissance era songs. Robin Hood, of course, being a big story at the time. Bowed viola gives us a dancey feel here, so Robin Hood is apparently a happy, dancey kind of guy. Let's hear this. Now that's really good composing when you can, avoid the cadence for that long and just kind of draw the listener along. It makes the samples very long though, but there you go. Better for us. I also love words like stout. Stout would mean like he's sturdy and strong, as opposed to today where it means he's overweight. How words change. Anyway, track 10, anonymous, Robin Hood. This is a bowed viola solo. This starts slowly and spaciously and goes through some variations of rhythm. There's a more dancing section in the middle before the slower, more spacious approach reappears at the end. Track 11. This is another anonymous piece, Preludium. This sounds a bit more on the intellectual side, harmonically speaking. It reaches out into some interesting key areas, finding unexpected resolutions, and it's very brief. Track 12. Gervais Girard, Pavan. Played slowly with some weight to its rhythm, there are lots of satisfying double-stopped harmonies that ring out of the instrument with rich tone. At around 2 minutes and 25 seconds, the first section ends and a new, harmonically answering section begins in the same tempo and mood. The piece lightens up with some light pizzicati accompanying the melody at the end, and I'd like to sample that end. Let's go from about the 4 minute and 30 second mark. Okay, I like those pizzicati there. While that was playing, by the way, I looked back at track 11, and there is a composer there by the name of Anthony, and that's all we know about him. It's not an anonymous work, the Preludium. The piece we just heard was Gervais Girard's Pavane. Then we moved to track 13, Alfonso Ferrabosco II. Galliard Coranto. This is a rather slow, heavy Galliard. The rhythm is there, but it seems ponderous, not least because of some of the pauses on inconclusive harmonies. It's an interesting piece to listen to. At around 2 minutes and 25 seconds, a more dancing rhythm appears, but the tone remains on the heavy side, and it arrives at a pleasant ending. Track 14, Robert Jones. Now What's Love? Céline Scheen re-enters the program here, and it's wonderful to hear her after an entire section of the program dedicated to the viola da gamba, which also was very enjoyable. The voice is refreshing to hear in this dancing piece. The voice shows a bit of flexibility with the pronunciation at some points, but it's not as expressive as it could be. Still, gorgeous tone throughout. Track 15, back to Alfonso Ferrabosco II, Alman Coranto. It's a mid-tempo viola solo, and I like hearing the instrument's higher range in the melody here, so I'm going to sample the beginning of this. We more or less get a repeat of that opening there, and then the piece goes on. This piece rather lightens the mood at this point, and the lilt of the rhythm assists. It lightens further toward the end, and it's a pleasant work. Track 16, here's his name again, Giulio Caccini, Amor io parto, Love I Go. The text of the song is printed in the booklet, but without a heading, so look for it just after the text for track 14. It's sort of included in track 14. It starts with the bowed viola da gamba, and it's got that wonderful vocal opening where the vocal line unexpectedly rises in the first line. Although if you listen to Caccini's music often, I guess you would expect it. But it always comes as a bit of a surprise even though, because it's just not such an ordinary thing to do. Let's hear from the point where the vocal enters at around the 25-second mark. The voice is allowed to bloom on open vowel sounds throughout the song, and once again Scheen demonstrates how at home she is in singing Caccini's songs, which expose the technique of the singer quite a bit. You want to notice the sudden mood changes provided by the viola at the beginning of phrases. There's a lot of pleasure to be had from Caccini's songs. Track 17, Alfonso Ferrabosco II, or the second. I guess I should have said it like that all the way through. Why Stays the Bridegroom? The viola da gamba begins by playing the melody in unison with the vocalist. It's a bowed piece, a cantare alla viola. Scheen's voice blends well with the viola da gamba here, and she gets some expressive high notes off, always sweetly taken as the album title suggests. The text is in English, but I can't figure out what it's about. So, sometimes your native language doesn't help you. Track 18, Anonymous Bonnie Sweet Robin. We're back to Robin Hood again. This is another suite of viola da gamba solos, the beginning of one anyway. This one's bowed and rather somber in tone and tempo. It picks up energy at the 47-second mark for its next section, and this really is a set of variations on the opening theme. Track 19, Daniel Ferrant, Pavin or Pavan. This has the expected slow, marked tempo of this dance. There are some ear-catching harmonies deep down, and this piece does dig low into the instrument at times. It remains gentle throughout. Track 20, Alfonso Ferrabosco II again, Why Stays the Bridegroom. This is the same text that we heard earlier. The piece is really repeated here in a truncated version. I didn't sample it the first time, so I guess I should here since it's being called attention to so often. So let's hear a bit of that. It's labeled as part 2 of the song. Now, the song's almost over at this point. She's really singing out here, and it's a really enjoyable piece. Track 21, Tobias Hume, Adieu, Sweet Love. This is one final bowed instrumental on the album. It's brief, and is a slow lament, sensitively played by Pierlot, with ample space given to the melody and the pauses between phrases. Track 22, John Wilby, Weep, Weep Mine Eyes. So we end on a lament, sung in English and accompanied by bowed viola da gamba. Let's hear the opening. And continues from there. It starts, as you heard, with wonderful understatement, then it reaches up with a bit more energy after that. I don't want to say drama, that's not the approach here. It's more energy. The work remains gentle throughout and sends the listener off with a soft resolution at the end. Well, the album really lives up to its title. While I wouldn't characterize Céline Scheen's soprano as sweet, she has a gentle way of reaching for high notes that puts the listener in a good place. We get a bit of a history lesson with the use of the viola da gamba throughout. Most of the pieces are bowed, but a few are played in the lyra viola style with plucked accompaniment as though the violists were playing a lyre. Both effects work well, but by the end I was seduced by Philippe Pierlot's way with the bowed approach, which I guess is understandable since there's so much more of that on this album. I think the smooth attack of the gamba affects the way we hear Céline Scheen's voice, and probably the way she sings too. I frequently noticed the restraint with which Scheen went up for high notes, dampening the dramatic quality and giving something more gentle and lamenting, and sometimes dancing, in the more rhythmically active works. It's a beautiful record with subdued performances. I enjoyed it and hope people will seek it out.
I found it to be overall contemplative with the programming, lots of rubato tempos, varied senses of motion, and the program has a nice balance of the vocal and then the viola da gamba instrumentally. And that viola da gamba sounds huge and warm in the recording with just the right bit of edge to the tone to make it interesting in the solo pieces. And Scheen's vocal technique and phrasing are very accomplished. It's fun to listen to the English lyrics of these songs as well and try to figure out what they're about. I found it an enjoyable program overall, very musical. And as I said, it put me in a contemplative mood. I think I'll go back and listen to this one again some rainy morning.
A rainy morning, that sounds like a pretty good idea. I may do that myself. Okay, our second classical album features two composers that I really knew by name only, but the Naxos record put this out. It's by Alberto Franchetti, his Symphony in E minor, and his work Nella Foresta Nera, and Ermanno Wolf-Ferrari, Sinfonia da Camera Opus 8. I have to say, two very different pieces. These are played by the Orchestra Sinfonica di Roma and Francesco La Vecchia conducting. and the Wolf-Ferrari piece is played by MiNensemblet. This is released on August 9th, not too long ago. How time changes everything. When we think of the great opera composers, Giacomo Puccini is near the top of everyone's list. Yet during Puccini's lifetime, there were other opera composing stars, and Alberto Franchetti was one of them. His two most successful operas were Cristoforo Colombo, or Christopher Columbus, and Germania. He was Jewish and was born into a wealthy family. His father was Baron Raimondo Franchetti, and his mother was Luisa Sara Rothschild of the Viennese banking dynasty. Boy, wow. Talk about being born into money. It may be because he was Jewish that his work had been forgotten. During the fascist era in Italy, Mussolini forbade the performance of music by Jewish composers. But it could also have something to do with the criticism Franchetti faced for being too erudite and mannerist. The author of the booklet note I've been liberally lifting sentences from up to now, Tommaso Manera, says that whatever the reason, when you hear Franchetti's music today, his descent into oblivion is hard to explain. The symphonic work we have here was a requirement for his graduation from the Dresden Conservatory. It's the only one he ever wrote. I guess he wrote mostly operas. And it nevertheless garnered an impressive level of international success. It's more than an academic exercise. The work is German in nature, but includes a rich variety of timbral blends. All right, so let's start listening to this. This is Franchetti's Symphony in E minor, composed in 1884 and performed here by Orchestra Sinfonica di Roma, conducted by Francesco La Vecchia. The first movement starts like this. So a lot of ideas just right away in that opening, and not least of which was that sort of hunting horn melody right at the beginning. You really didn't expect that. There's good pacing from the orchestra and La Vecchia here, and the strings are sumptuous and resonate in the space. We arrive at the second theme quickly at about 1 minute and 12 seconds in. Idea follows idea pretty quickly, and they're all very good and full of contrast so that each element stands out. At around the 2 minute and 30 second mark, we hear a repeat of the opening material, but it sounds reorchestrated this time. Again, a clever idea. At 5 minutes, we reach the cadence and go into the development section. Yeah, this is a pretty traditional sonata form movement. Attractive themes are presented here in their different keys, and everything remains highly musical. We don't get much sense of material being worked out, though there is some of that as the end of the section approaches, and Franchetti has to reach E minor. At around the 7 minute and 20 second mark, we crash into what is the recapitulation, but it doesn't go as exactly as it did in the opening. And again, the timbres are changed. It's pretty creative writing within a very traditional form, appealing and decorous, really, and beautifully performed here. The second movement, Larghetto, is in song form. The strings play with a soft glow to them, making this sound really like something of its era. Let's hear the opening. You know, those last 10 or 15 seconds really could have come out of a Hollywood movie, yet this was composed before movies were really a thing. As you can imagine, this has a beautiful romantic flow to it as a more candlelit opera aria would. There's some attractive writing for the oboe in the 3rd minute, and after that we get a dramatic section for strings, which quietens in the 4th minute into some intimate writing for the strings, growing bolder when brass are added for the theme in the 5th minute. This movement really is song-like with some dramatic climaxes, but not much like the drama we'd expect from an opera. It remains more song-like and is appealing, and probably unique in Franchetti's catalog for that. The ending has a lovely hush in the strings and the winds carrying the movement to the final chord. Track 3, 3rd movement, Intermezzo e Trio. This is more of a scherzo and trio according to the notes. It has symmetrical elements. This has kind of a light, rushing energy to it, not too far away from the minuets of Haydn's time, only much more sumptuously scored. It is more in the scherzo guise, though, with a heavier rhythm and a 3/4 whirling feel. The trio starts at 1 minute and 57 seconds in the woodwinds, and again the thinner texture recalls the classical era, but the big-boned 3/4 waltz rhythm imposes itself and sweeps all before it. The intermezzo or scherzo theme is back at about the 3 minute and 27 second mark. There's quite a bit of ballroom glitter to this movement. Track 4, the 4th movement and final movement, Allegro vivace, starts with a rather understated light timpani roll. Strings come in quietly and play a theme, then the winds introduce more material to complete it, and the entire opening is fleshed out into a fully formed section. Tempo here is on the restrained side, but La Vecchia has this flowing nicely. The movement and really the entire piece comes across as tasteful and well formed. In the 2nd minute, we have a new section, then a repeat of some opening ideas. This doesn't stick to a sonata form, really. It's a lot freer than the 1st movement and moves quickly from idea to idea. At around the 3 minute and 15 second mark, there's an interesting timpani roll, followed by pizzicata strings, rather an unexpected surprise, and I'd like to play that. It won't be too surprising here because you didn't hear the first 3.5 minutes, but let's sample it anyway. Yeah, some pretty interesting writing in that section. After that, as we heard here, the brass play a theme against the scurrying strings, and at the end, the thematic material is played by a brass chorale sounding marmoreal over the strings. Marmoreal, rock-like. It takes over the texture and brings the piece to an unexpected end. Track 5 is Alberto Franchetti's piece Nella Foresta Nera, or In the Black Forest, Impressione Sinfonica, or Symphonic Impression, from the year 1900. Performed by the Orchestra Sinfonica di Roma, Francesco La Vecchia conducting. Franchetti saw Germany as a second homeland and even took German citizenship for a while as a means to obtain a divorce from his wife, Margherita Levi. I wonder if he can still do that. Anyway, the landscape of Germany inspired this piece, and Franchetti called this a symphonic impression. Let's hear the lovely Wagnerian brass opening with the rest of the orchestra drifting along as if acting like a mist. Yeah, I guess if you want to evoke Germany, you would do something like Wagner. Let's hear the opening. And just as it's getting interesting, we fade out. Go click on the link and hear the whole movement. The clarinet plays a contrasting theme. Afterwards, we heard the beginning of that, and the woodwinds take over. In the 2nd minute, we hear a winding string theme, with high winds playing bird-like melodies. The brass are still present, providing German spirit. They morph beautifully into winds in the third minute, then to strings. Swirling figures develop behind the melody, bringing some more rhythmic impetus. There are a lot of Wagnerian openings into a new, unexpected key, as though a new landscape has suddenly come into view. The music gradually quietens until it's all gentle wind harmony in the 8th minute. In the 9th minute, the piece nears its end with a charming repeating two-note chirping motif as the music heads to its long-held final cadence. Tracks 6 through 9 is a work by the composer Ermanno Wolf-Ferrari. He lived 1876 to 1948, and this is his Sinfonia da Camera in B-flat major, opus 8, composed in 1901 and performed here by MiNensemblet, who are a Norwegian ensemble, their chamber ensemble. Wolf-Ferrari's mother was Italian, and his father was Bavarian, so I guess I should pronounce it Wolf-Ferrari. Ermanno himself was from Venice. He never really became an Italian composer, though. His appeal was more international. He enjoyed success in Germany and abroad. Today, he's most associated with works for the stage. By the way, this all comes from the booklet note. I need to give credit there. The internal development of his music can be said to be looser and more rhapsodic than that of composers like Brahms and Wagner. And the booklet note writer here, by the way, is Morten Eide Pedersen. The rhapsodic quality characterizes this work. Track 6, the first movement, Allegro Moderato. This starts with a solo piano line, a set of arpeggiated chords that sets the rhythm. Clarinet plays a theme over that. And it's a compelling opening, and rather comes as a surprise because we've been hearing all orchestral music so far in this album, and suddenly we have the less layered sound of a chamber ensemble. Anyway, let's hear this. I'd say that's attractive. There's quite a bit of passionate build-up that leads to a roiling section at 1 minute and 50 seconds, which eventually gets us to a broad romantic gesture at the 2-minute mark, almost Hollywood in feel. But of course this was before those great Hollywood soundtracks of the 1930s. At 3 minutes we get a new take on the material. Wolf-Ferrari has some interesting timbral combining ideas. There's an appealing theme for French horn at 3 minutes and 25 seconds or so, which the violin then takes over. A lot of this movement seems to be spent traveling towards a tonic resolution. One is reached at around the 5-minute mark, and we hear a rather aggressive theme that gives way to arpeggiated chords and a brief section for winds. A big dramatic splashy section follows in the 6th minute, and this moves to something more quiet and exploratory until a repeating melodic pattern is reached and provides the material that will bring us to the end of the movement. The performance is committed and pretty powerful, though the work itself seems to take a lot of detours. Track 7, the second movement, the slow movement, Adagio, starts with repeating piano chords providing a bed under the bassoon, which starts the movement with an appealing theme. Again, rather unusual to start with a bassoon as your solo instrument. I like the orchestration here. Strings eventually bring the theme a romantic feel and take it further, accompanied by the piano. At 1 minute and 38 seconds, the theme is stated grandly by the whole ensemble. The piece then lightens with a new section starting with a solo clarinet line. There's a lulling quality by the end of sections in this piece, and the bassoon gets another solo spot with the theme in the 3rd minute. A new mysterious section starts in the 4th minute, all winds with piano accompaniment, and eventually takes us back to familiar material. The movement tends to linger on its main themes once they appear, and they're appealing enough to be inviting. In the 8th minute, the bassoon's theme returns in the bassoon in a quiet section. There's a nice moonlit quality to it, but the movement itself involves a lot of contrast. It ends with 3 brass chorale-like chords, rather unusually. Now in this case, I want to play the end of the movement and sample the closing, really the last 45 seconds or so. Yeah, that really didn't end where I expected it to. Track 8, third movement, Vivace con Spirito. The opening of this rather reminded me of the opening of the scherzo of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, with the piano playing similar rhythms. See if you can hear that. So you hear that potentially aggressive opening, and then it introduces this really sweet melody. So a little bit of a surprise there as well. The entire thing morphs into a ballet-like theme for the flute, as we heard the beginning of there. A violin eventually takes the theme over. The theme builds up to a thicker orchestration after this, featuring the piano as well. It comes to a calm end, once again, in the flute. Track 9, the finale. Adagio, moving to Allegro moderato. So we have an introduction and then an Allegro. This has bold chords at the beginning. The piano sets the severe mood with unison lines in the bass end. He has a lot of flourishes until the rest of the orchestra comes in, or the rest of the ensemble comes in a fanfare-like theme, which quickly breaks up. By the middle of the first minute, we reach a bold theme that's then developed. There's so much going on in this movement, so much approaching of tonic keys and indecisive themes that it's hard to follow. There does seem to be one theme that keeps appearing and acting as a guide. I should say all of the music as well as the playing is very appealing here, and the MiNensemble certainly have an idea of how to interpret this, but I found it to be a bit too much, and it's constantly moving in new harmonic directions. It sounds indecisive, and maybe that's the point. The movement does, in the 7th minute, finally land on a stable theme that is written on calm Cs to a false cadence, which brings us to a final indecisive piano line. A few indecisive chords, then a confident ending in the tonic. The final chord is hammered on a comical number of times to get into our heads that last chord is indeed the tonic key. And that's the end of the album. So I learned something new this week. These are composers I'd only heard of in name, but I hadn't actually heard their music. The music on this album is very good and excellently performed. Musically, I can't say it's a great discovery, but in Franchetti we do get interesting ideas. It's the sort of thing people who are interested in going off the beaten track, or who might be interested in these composers, will have to hear. It's all exceptionally well performed and recorded. The music itself is full of charm, particularly Franchetti's Nella Foresta Nera, which is scored with elegant timbral combinations. The Wolf-Ferrari work is for chamber ensemble, yet still comes up full sounding. It's a work with a lot of ideas, some of which don't seem to know where they want to go, but no worries, he writes appealing music and is well presented by the MiNensemble here. So this is an album of appealing music to discover and enjoy. It may not be essential listening, but it's certainly enjoyable, well performed, and well worth a listen.
Yeah, there's nothing particularly innovative here, but on the other hand, it's all incredibly romantic and enjoyable.
Romantic, yes.
Franchetti's Symphony has delicious orchestration with a balance of all the sections of the orchestra and appealing melodies and interweaving of instrument lines. And the woodwinds stand out with attractive lines for solo instruments. The Nella Foresta symphonic impression is very atmospheric and attractive with outstanding woodwind parts as well. And the Wolf-Ferrari Sinfonia da Camera has a lot of variety within each movement. The piano often takes the center of attention, but my ear was often drawn to the woodwind and horn parts. There's a sense of playfulness and unpredictability that lasts right up to the end.
Right.
And that makes it kind of enjoyable. Yeah, so it's all enjoyable music, and I'm glad we got a chance to hear it.
Yeah, some interesting use of timbre in those works.
Definitely.
Okay, now in coming weeks, I have a load of contemporary composers who I don't really know much about coming up, so I'm pretty excited about it all. So let's start here. Actually, this has been going on for the last 2 weeks as well. But here we have a recording by Jane Stanley, Australian composer born in 1976. She now lives in Glasgow, Scotland. And this is her album, Cerulean Orbits, performed by the Hermes Experiment and the Red Note Ensemble on the Delphian label. This came out on July 26th. This album has a portrait of the composer theme, and it features pieces for different chamber combinations composed between 2013 and 2023. And these works are all really very different from each other. They don't really form like a program of anything thematic. The only real theme is that this is sort of like a calling card for this composer. Stanley says that her compositional method prizes texture, decoration, and color, and this is an influence of her mother's, whose crafting hobbies included knitting, sewing, and making clothes, embroidering, and fabric dyeing. So in that sense, it doesn't mean that it's all surface. It just means that there's a lot of complexity on the top, and yet there's the craft of doing these things as well. Stanley's mother also worked for a Sydney textile wholesaler that sold silk fabric to Australian fashion designers and opera companies. The influence of other composers as well as post-tonal harmony are also involved in Stanley's compositions. Now that sounds like a lot, and believe it or not, we're going to hear all of that on this album. These are pretty involved works with a lot of influences coming in from a lot of different directions. Tracks 1 through 5, this is really the main work on the album, I would say, even though it's not the title track. It's called The Indifferent, and it was composed in 2023, so probably the most recent work too. And this is performed by the Hermes Experiment, Heloise Werner, soprano singer, Oliver Pashley, clarinet, Anne Denholm, harp, and Marianne Schofield, double bass. The text is by the Australian poet Judith Bishop. For this piece, Bishop divided an existing text of hers, a prose poem from her 2007 collection Event, into 5 sections, which she further annotated by means of what she called an emotional and linguistic score, which you can read in the booklet along with the texts. I'll leave the text to the listener and focus on the overall sound. There's a lot of beach and sea imagery in the poem, which is more or less about a lover contemplating her absent love while walking by the sea. Track 1 of this 5-section piece, I guess you could say 5-movement piece, they're all unnamed, they're just sort of numbered. So number 1, this starts with threads of sound. The first gesture is repeated and comes back often after being added to. It's rather attractive. Heloise Werner's voice is attractive in the part, so let's sample this piece from where the voice enters about 30 seconds in. I do like Werner's tone when she sings in this piece. I like the use of the wind instruments in the piece too, and how they sort of anticipate the vocal line, and sometimes imitate it. There's sort of a calming quality to this section. All instruments are played gently, as you heard. Track 2 is the second section. This starts lightly again with the harp. The vocal is more urgent this time, and the accompaniment follows suit without ever taking the listener out of the comfort zone set by the first movement. Let's hear the opening of this section.
Lightly, lightly, go on. Your message.
So the harp is played rather aggressively here, and yet, I don't know, it always kind of has that sweet sound to it. The vocal line sounds like it's focusing on a specific set of tones. They sound similar to those used in the first movement. There are new gestures here, however, including some rapid enunciation of the words. Track 3, I guess we could call this the third movement in that section. But here the vocalist starts the movement with long sustained tones on the text. So let's hear that.
He
Heloise Werner has like a real way of putting across the emotion here. I like the way she really lightly colors her tone, and she's got a really good range as well, able to express all of these words in their various ranges. Here the clarinet gets an extended calm solo in the first minute, and the vocalist sings the text like incoming waves. This movement has a wave-like lull and flow to it. Track 4, the fourth movement, starts with a bit of an angular rhythm to it, staccato and hopping from note to note. The vocalist imitates this approach with the words. Many are sung staccato until the vocalist lands on a sustained word. The imagery in the text focuses heavily on bees by the sea. And track 5, the final movement, contrasts with the previous one via its longer tones. There's a repeating figure in the clarinet that sounds like a sort of call, while other watery figures surround the vocalist as she vocalizes. Let's hear a sample of the opening of this section. Okay, and I want to go out on that clarinet call that just keeps repeating throughout the section. There's a sort of heartbreak to the sound of this movement, and the piece ends in despair and is musically inconclusive. Alright, and the rest of the program from track 6 on is performed by members of the Red Note Ensemble. I'll name them as they come up. Track 6, the title track, Cerulean Orbits for violin and piano, composed in 2016. This features Jacqueline Shave on the violin and Simon Smith on the piano. So the piece is called Cerulean Orbits, and orbits, I would say, is the key word here. The violin and piano circle each other throughout the piece. This starts with a lightly splashed piano chord, after which the violin immediately starts playing wavering figures, going for extended bowing technique here. The violin is more melodic while the piano is more splashy. They're instruments that aren't alike, and Stanley is playing to those differences. The approach becomes more dramatic as the dynamic gets louder in the second minute, and that's where I'm going to sample right at the beginning of the second minute. I can't really say that short section gives a good approximation of what the entire piece sounds like. It does change dynamically, but the whole violin versus piano aspect of it continues throughout. The piano grows insistent with its fortissimo chords as the violin plays with force. A quieter, more skyward-leaning section follows with buoyant legato violin lines and many contrasting raindrop splashes from the piano. The piano eventually arrives at its highest notes, which we rarely hear in compositions, then starts playing urgent repeated notes in its middle to higher range as the violin spirals around it. The piece comes around to a calm place to end, with the violin sustaining a single note as the piano gently splashes. Track 7, Helix Reflection for flute and B-flat clarinet, 2013. Well, that attracted my eye, and I really needed to hear this. I really do like both of these instruments, the flute and the clarinet. This features Ruth Morley on the flute and Timothy Lynes on the clarinet. Here the instruments are more similar, and their close interweaving evokes the image of a double helix. Tension is created by blending notes that are almost but not quite in tune with one another. The overall trajectory is towards a kind of independence. We hear those not quite blended notes right at the beginning, with the flute occasionally separating from the clarinet, then coming back as though they're attached by a rubber band. I rather liked this effect, so I'm going to sample the beginning. Now, some listeners may be thinking that that's an ear-splitting sound, but I personally find it haunting. And I think that's because my ears have been trained by listening to George Ligoti's music over the years. This has just become a normal sound for me. In the first minute, both instruments find brief melodic lines, which include repeated notes and some timbral change via flutter tonguing. There's some simultaneous trills that are attractive. The piece comes across as a kind of gentle shaking movement at this point. As the clarinet plays sustained tones, the flute starts fluttering around its range in the third minute. The piece ends on some lightly taken flute staccato. And by the way, I also want to mention, just because this piece is named after a geometrical figure like the helix, that kind of reminds me of Ligeti too. He was very mathematical in his approach and used those images in shaping his music as well. So I think this piece reminded me of Ligeti quite a bit. Tracks 8 through 16, Suite for B-flat clarinet, violin, cello, and piano, composed in 2014, revised in 2023. Timothy Lines on clarinet, Jacqueline Shave, violin, Christian Elliott, cello, and Simon Smith, piano. This is a multi-movement work. The first one is called Density and starts with low piano rumblings. This is track 8, by the way. The line is repeated before more tones come in. At the 38-second mark, we hear the rest of the ensemble playing tones of their own that all sound like separate gestures. It reminds me a bit of the first movement of Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, though it's structured completely differently. Maybe a bit of Elliott Carter in there. There's a dynamic surge right at the end that ends the movement, but I'd like to go to about, let's say, just past the 1 minute mark to just give it an idea of what this sounds like. Track 9, the second movement, is called Clarity. This starts as a continuation of the previous movement. There are a lot of octave and unison harmonies in this movement with the clarinet up top. The piano eventually provides some other patterns to listen to. Track 10, third movement, Drifting, Cascading, and this features violin and piano only. A skittering piano gesture opens the piece. As it plays, the viola comes in with long sustained tones that drop at the end. Let's hear the opening. The violin's approach more or less lasts throughout the movement, as the piano busily plays underneath, sometimes echoing the violin's gestures. Track 11 is movement 3A. It's an interlude for violin, cello, and piano. The previous movement leaks into this one and disappears. The strings play sul ponticello, and the piano rumbles out a line heavy in harmonics. Those harmonics are allowed to ring out at the end. Track 12, Fourth movement, ostinato study for piano solo. This is ostinato and staccato. Stanley seems to like this sound of the pianos where the notes sound like individual drops of tone, sort of like raindrops falling individually. This has more of an atonal feel to it. Track 13, the fifth movement, mechanical birds. The opening features violin and clarinet in the mechanical bird rolls. The piano eventually comes in fugato, playing the line. Let's hear the opening of this and listen for those mechanical birds. I get out just before the piano comes in, really. The lines have ostinato qualities, but are not strict ostinati, and the movement ends quietly. Track 14, the sixth movement, floating weightless. Long clarinet tone after a piano note opening. The cello and violin contribute. This is all sustained tones. The piece slowly moves towards its end in this sustained note after sustained note manner. Track 15, the seventh movement, restless, antagonistic. For clarinet, violin, and cello. This sounds like something from the early Second Viennese school, so sort of Schoenberg and his group, with its wisps of haiku-like lines that drift by. It's also very brief. And the final movement is track 16, the eighth movement, effervescent and soothing. This movement was extended for the recording, and it has a pleasant texture at the opening that's broken off at times. Let's hear that opening. The piece eventually gets into Stanley's textural detail as each instrument starts its own specific contrapuntal line. But these eventually smooth into repeating figures that build up some tension. The music calms down a bit in the second minute, in which the cello sets the rhythm via bouncing the bow off the strings, so spiccato. The movement ends with the music simply losing energy and vanishing. And the final work on the album, tracks 17 to 23, is also the longest. It's called Oneiroi, and it was composed in 2023. This features Ruth Morley on flute and doubling piccolo and alto flute, Timothy Lyons on clarinet and doubling bass clarinet, Simon Smith on piano and doubling finger cymbals and crotals, Tom Hunter, percussion, Jacqueline Shave, violin, and Christian Elliott, cello and doubling crotals. There's no overall score for this piece and no conductor. Instead, each player is given an individual part and a succession of cues are used to guide players from one section to the next. Much of the notated music consists of cells, which in some passages may be mixed in free order and elsewhere are indicated to be played in the order written. The players have to make decisions regarding pacing and ordering of material by listening to one another. And the piece is in fact a wholesale reworking of a now withdrawn piece for mezzo-soprano, piano, and percussion called Dreamingly, composed in 2015. So there you get the Oneiroi title. The Oneiroi were, in Greek mythology, the sons of Nyx, night, and the brothers of Hypnos, sleep, and Oneiros, of course, means dream. The original piece, composed in 2015, Dreamingly, was a setting of 3 poems by E. Cummings, and in the current piece these poems survive in the form of single words or phrases used in the section headings, and I'll mention them as they go by. The approach to this work, if you're familiar with Terry Riley's In C, where the musicians all get sort of parts that they have to play, but they can play them really at any time, and they sort of have to put it together themselves, echoes the approach of this work, but I mean, they're both very different sound worlds. I'm also reminded a bit of John Cage a bit here, his aleatoric kind of works, or just we don't really know what the piece is going to sound like at the beginning. It depends on how the musicians put it across. Anyway, keeping that in mind, let's hear a bit of this. Track 17 is titled Dreamingly, and of course this is a lowercase d, as E. E. Cummings' poems always had lowercase letters, if we remember them. It starts with distant woody percussion, very spacious. Then a hesitant flute plays a few staccato notes. There's loads of space in this. Low winds come in, bending notes, and I like the overall sound. The sounds are either fluttering rapid staccato or long sustained tones. Track 18, headed Gold. I should mention the sections all run into each other, and this one begins with more sustained tones in the violin and distant flute. Let's hear the opening here, and we'll get an idea of what this piece sounds like. A piano eventually enters, and we heard a bit of it there. It's hard to describe what happens as each musician is making up his own mind about when to play and how to play it. By the 2-minute and 20-second mark, we do have a sustained, more or less mellifluous period of flowing tones. I like the way the ensemble is distributed across the speakers, sounds suddenly popping out from unexpected places on the soundstage. A pounding piano chord leads to the next track, which is track 19, headed Trembling. The texture here features an almost metallic percussive sound from the piano in its high end as other instruments flutter in the texture. And I rather like the sound of the whole thing. It has an energy to it, maybe a trembling energy. Let's hear a sample. Track 20 is headed with sort of odd punctuation marks. It's sort of a set of 2 commas, a space and 2 commas, and underneath that, quotation marks with a ... between them. Sort of what you'd think of as a kind of primitive emoji, I guess, if we are talking about computer times, which really weren't around when E. E. Cummings was writing his poetry. Anyway, a crescendo on a particular pattern begins this section. After the complex opening, the tones become sustained in the winds, and we get some satisfyingly reedy bassoon tunes in there too. Track 21, Enter No Silence. This has a quickly bowed violin playing a single tone, featuring brief flute appearances and piano patterns that suddenly stop and evaporate into the harmonics they leave behind. The violin gets a lot of room here, and I'm going to sample this from around the 2-minute and 30-second mark. Yeah, so by now you're getting an idea of the variety of patterns and sounds and combinations of timbres that we're going to hear in this piece. That sounds like a vibraphone in there. I guess those are the crotals. More of the ensemble comes in, and we get a pileup of timbres in the 3rd minute. They gradually dwindle, leaving the violin still working its part, with the piano occasionally coming in with patterns. By the end, we hear only the piano and the vibraphone, or the marimba. It sounds like it has a lot of sustain, though. Somebody is labeled as playing percussion, so that could be Tom Hunter playing the vibes or marimba there. I'm not really sure. Track 22, Timelessly. A repeated piano note brings us into the section, and the violin picks it up. Chimes and other light percussion eventually come in, and the flute plays something almost melodic, but then reverts to tones and toneless blowing into the instrument, which is also a sound I like. Let's hear a sample of this movement. This is from about the 2-minute mark. And the final movement, track 23, is headed Lifting. The violin starts this last section with the bassoon imitating its repeated note. There's some sul ponticello bowing for effect, and the flute can be heard as well. The piece suddenly ends quietly on a lightly struck chime as the repeating quiet notes from the winds suddenly stop. So, Jane Stanley mentions in her notes that she has a lot of influences, and all of them show up on the surface in this music. Her attention to detail on the surface is noteworthy, as are her nods to recent composers like Elliott Carter in her harmony, especially in pieces like The Suite. Oneiros had me thinking of the techniques of Terry Riley or John Cage, but it doesn't sound like them. It's more ornate. Ornate is a good way to describe Stanley's music, in fact. It has a lot of ornament, but it does tend to communicate something deeper than its surface material. That deeper material is abstract, however, and hard to pin down. So it has the same quality as, dreams themselves, I guess. You don't really know what they're about, but you're seeing them and they're kind of interesting. It exists in the form of flow or stasis, that material. It's the movement that's beneath the surface. The album is indeed a portrait, as each piece is very different, though Stanley does leave behind an identifiable fingerprint. It's an interesting listen, I'll say that, on the atmospheric side, with activity on the surface that draws the attention.
The sparse instrumentation and timbral combinations are interesting here. After the vocal work, there's not a lot of melodic material to focus on, but rather how the instruments interact with each other and the unique sounds that they make. And my ear was drawn to the bass clarinet when it sort of slithers in a couple times during the recording. So I thought the sparseness and instrumentation was appealing, and you have to sort of get your mind into what the instrument is producing and what's unique about that, especially in the paired pieces where you have instruments of contrasting and then similar natures, and follow along how they interact with each other. In that sense, it was pretty interesting. And yeah, let's hear some more from Stanley and see what other kind of sides she has, aspects to her composing in the future. Okay, over on the jazz side, it's trumpet time again tonight with 3 trumpet recordings. We're going to start out with Noah Halpern's The Embrace, Volume 1. This is a self-release that came out on August 9th. Now, Noah Halpern's been playing on the New York jazz scene for almost a decade, as well as playing around the U.S. and the world. Originally from Seattle, Washington, he began playing piano at age 5 before switching to the trumpet at 10. And Noah moved to New York City in 2014 to attend the Juilliard School, where he got a bachelor's in music and also a master's in music. And he received mentorship there from great artists including Eddie Henderson, Frank Kimbrough, Joe Magnarelli, and more. He's since performed with artists including Wynton Marsalis, Jason Moran, Ulysses Owens, Lalo Hathaway, and many more. He was a cast member in the immersive theater production Sleep No More. He's composed and performed music for dance ensembles, the Juilliard New Dances, music videos, electronic projects, and the band Meridian Odyssey, of which he's a member. He's also got his own project, the Noah Halpern Quartet, and he currently resides in Brooklyn. He was the winner of the 2023 ITG Carmine Caruso International Jazz Trumpet Competition. On this recording, Noah Halpern on trumpet and all original compositions, Santos Sharma tenor saxophone, Micah Thomas on piano, who we've heard before on the podcast, episode 84, cerebral keys with his recording Piano Solo back in 2022, Tyrone Allen on bass, and Domo Branch on drums. This was recorded at Pinch Studios in Astoria, Queens in May of 2022. Recording engineer Scott Lindner, editing Chris Gold, mixing Todd Whitelock, mastering Mike Piacentini. And the recording's going to get going with a tune called The Embrace, the intro. It's a rubato, slowly flowing opener with long legato horn lines over piano ripples and drum fills. Comes to a calm ending at just about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I'll skip over that and go right to track 2, Midnight Runners. Branch gives a drum start with some tight snare work into an intro section of a horn line and syncopated piano chords on this one. The melody is a repeating 36-measure construction that is made up of 2-note horn figures that move around. Let's hear this tune get going. Well, on the repeat of the melody section, Halpern gets his solo going before the final horn phrase. Let's hear some of his improvised ideas on this tune. Some interesting harmonic twists and playful rhythmic ideas in his solo. Thomas follows with a piano solo, starting with shorter phrases into more connected but unpredictable lines. He's an interesting pianist. They get restarted on the melody, but it transforms into a solo piano section from Thomas that builds up with legato horn lines and a building drum beat to a joyful ending. Track 3 is called Phoenix, in parentheses, for Frank. This starts out as a gentle ballad with trumpet over piano and the bass and drums building in. Sharma's sax adds in with some harmony, and then things get more insistent with even quarter note piano chords and more urgent improvised ideas from Halpern. Let's pick it up from about 1 minute into the tune. it gets back to more gentle harmonized horn lines, Thomas has an interesting piano solo with ideas in both hands that stand out, and Sharma gets a sax solo too. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Builds up the tension, getting rejoined by Halpern, who works it to a peaceful ending with a half-valved squeezed note into the final phrase. Track 4 is B4. Thomas makes a solo piano intro for this one. The horns have an evolving 40-measure melody that has a repeating lick that becomes familiar over the clicky even beat. On this tune, let's sample Thomas's inventive piano solo. He really keeps you guessing with his ideas, but after all that skipping around, there's a little lick that sounds like Miles Davis's 4 at the end there. Halpern's solo on this one has good agility and harmonic exploration, and they take it through the horn melody once more to finish it up. Track 5 is called PGB. This is a fun rhythmic tune, and Thomas sits out on piano. Alan gets it going with an 8-measure bass intro and gets joined for another round by the drums. The 48-measure horn melody is syncopated and has a lot of tricky interval jumps. Let's hear it get started. The final sections turn legato before Sharma's up for a sax solo that gets intense with a lot of speedy lines and honks. Halpern joins him for a legato melody section transition to his own solo. He's got extra harmonic freedom here over just the bass, and Alan is switching things up between snappy figures and walking. Let's hear some of that neat interaction later on in the tune. He keeps it going with more ideas until Sharma joins back in for a couple times through the legato sections and a final syncopated section of the melody to end it. Track 6 is Before, Interlude. This is a more up-tempo, energetic reworking of the melody from track 4, Before. I skipped over that for a sample of Thomas's solo, so let's check out the tune here with some extra excitement infused from Sharma and Thomas. And that's pretty much it at 1 minute and 10 seconds or so. Track 7, Someday Soon / Lullaby. This is a ballad that Sharma sits out on. It gets going with just trumpet and piano. Halpern's phrasing is lyrical, and he and Thomas have a good synergy on the rubato flow. Drums and bass are in just before 2 minutes, giving it a slow processional feel with light toms. Just before 3 minutes, it picks up a bit more energy of movement, but gets quiet for a rhythm section interlude. I'd like to sample Halpern's short improvised solo back into the melody here that is particularly expressive. It works to a gentle ending from there. Track 8 is called a Wham Lurk. This starts with a repeating riff horn intro for 8 measures. The horn melody is constantly evolving, leading to the opening riff idea again that gets soft and builds up, modulating around to a climax. Let's check it out. Sharma gets a pleading start to a solo from there that works over a cool groove from Branch and Allen. It gets really intense, so let's come back and check out a little bit more of his playing. Thomas follows with a piano solo that gets really out there, and Halpern has the last solo that works into the riff section from the end of the melody to wrap it up with some good drum energy from Branch. And the recording ends up with a tune called Lost in Your Eyes, which is actually a solo piano feature for Micah Thomas. After his last solo that was kind of from outer space, this shows off his more lyrical side and shows off what he can do with chord voicings. The melody's a 32-measure AABA form and kind of reminds me of Someday My Prince Will Come. After a play through the melody, Thomas has a more decorative play over a couple of A sections of the melody. So let's hear his ideas from there until the end of the tune that closes out the recording. Halpern has made an adventurous recording of his own original compositions. The structures are varied and the melodies evolving, keeping you challenged in listening for what will happen next. There's a lot of variety from more post-bop tunes to ballads. He builds in a lot of harmonic freedom, like in PGB where Thomas sits out, and that fits his soloing style that has a lot of harmonic exploration. His trumpet has a full tone, and his solos are expressive and have a lot of rhythmic variety in his ideas building to climaxes. Sharma adds some intense solos and a complementary voice on the horn lines, and Thomas proves to be an enigmatic soloist and has good energy with Halpern, especially on the more intimate ballad sections, getting his own solo showpiece to close out the recording. And Alan and Branch have tight, changing grooves throughout, keeping the energy running high. A nice balance of intellectual and expressive playing on this recording.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty subdued album. The most upbeat it gets is the piece you mentioned, PGB. A lot of the album goes into abstract excursions with the rhythm only lightly defined or coming in strong at unexpected points. The two stars on this album, I think, are Noah Halpern himself and Micah Thomas, who gets the last track to himself, as you mentioned. His playing is by turns gentle and abstract. He'll sometimes get into these Morse code rhythms that the brass will play over. And Halpern himself has an appealing tone and shows a lot of feeling in ballads. When he's up high in his range, his tone can be hot, and I really liked that. Santosh Sharma on sax brought energy to the album. He uses his whole range, and part of his style is to reach down for those honking bass notes, something I always find attractive in any kind of reed playing. It's a good album. It's a bit on the odd harmonic side, and for a good deal of it, but I liked it.
Yeah, all original compositions, another young trumpet player to keep your ear out for. There's a lot of great young players out there today. All right, something unique for our next recording. Not exactly trumpet, but cornet, the instrument I started out on before I switched to trumpet. And this is Mr. Kirk Knuffke with his new recording on SteepleChase, Super Blonde. This came out on August 9th as well. Born in 1980 and raised in Colorado, Knuffke was self-taught on the trumpet and cornet, later benefiting from the private instruction of such figures as Ornette Coleman, Art Land, and Ron Miles. Knuffke began playing with influential cornetist, composer, conductor Butch Morris after moving to New York City in 2005. He's made more than 20 albums as a leader or co-leader over the past 2 decades, and his 2022 release, Gravity Without Airs, that's on Tau Forms label, with pianist Matthew Shipp and bassist Michael Bisio, earned a review of 4.5 stars from Downbeat magazine. Knuffke's performed with Tootie Heath, Frank Kimbrough, and Carl Berger, also Myra Melford, Billy Hart, and William Parker. In addition to working with the Matt Wilson Quartet, he's also an ongoing member of drummer Allison Miller's Boom Tick Boom Sextet and guitarist Charlie Hunter's Quartet. On this recording, we've got a really unique instrumentation lined up. Kirk Knuffke on cornet, Jay Anderson on bass in the left channel, and Tommy Anderson on bass in the right channel, and Adam Nussbaum on drums.
That was a really interesting approach, I thought.
Certainly is. The recording gets underway with a tune called Willie the Weeper. This is based on a standard vaudeville song, likely written in 1904. The first recording of it is believed to be by cornetist Freddie Keppard, somewhere between 1923 and 1926. Things start out fun right away with the two basses getting a jangling 8-measure intro going into 2 measures of drums. That 8 plus 2 will be a pattern here when Knuffke comes in with the melody phrases. His style is puckish with echoes of New Orleans, staccato notes, and half-valve play. Let's hear this recording get started. Knuffke is mixing in chromatic lines and spitting out notes. It's so much fun. Let's hear some more where they take it into a double time feel, and we get some horse whinnying and some bass trading coming along as well. The basses keep on trading with fills from Nussbaum until Knuffke is back with some final melody sections to end it. Track 2, Smile, a tune by Charlie Chaplin, in fact, who composed the song with the help of composer David Raxon. It was inspired by a sequence in the first act love duet from Puccini's opera Tosca, and it's based on the theme song for Modern Times, Chaplin's movie from 1936. Everyone knows this melody, and it's a charming rendition here. Nussbaum gets it going with 2 measures of drums. As Knuffke makes the happy melody sing out, Jay Anderson has a loping half-note bass line, and Tommy Anderson has melodic answering lines coming along. Let's hear this one get going. Knuffke carries on with a rambunctious improvised solo and the basses, and then Knuffke gets some trading with Nussbaum that's a whole lot of fun. Let's check out a little bit more of that later on in the tune. Oh, it's back to the melody from there to wrap up this tune. Track 3, Golden Earrings, a tune by Victor Young. It's from the 1947 romantic spy movie. It became a hit recording in 1947 and 48 by Peggy Lee as well. This gets a long intro, starting with a unison cornet and bass line into some rubato bass interplay over Nussbaum's cymbal decorations. It works into a slow trudge of a tempo, creating an exotic atmosphere for Knuffke's cornet melody. Let's pick it up from where he comes in about a minute into the tune. Knuffke continues on into enthusiastic improvisations. Nussbaum's drumming is nuanced, and his varied rhythms and textures draw your ear. The basses have some exchanges before Knuffke is back with a final soft melody section to end it. Track 4 is Duke Ellington's African Flower, first recorded by Duke Ellington with Charlie Mingus and Max Roach in 1962. Nussbaum gets it going with soft drumming. Knuffke is muted here. Tommy Anderson keeps a snappy bass groove while Jay Anderson plays some high double-stopped bowing before adding some harmonies to Jay's lines. It's a really unique atmosphere, so let's check it out. Knuffke's solo on this is great, really snapping rhythmic phrases to the groove, but I want to sample the eerie double bass bowing interplay here a little bit later on in the tune. You don't hear that sound every day. Knuffke is back from there with a final melody section. Track 5, Ever Living Root. This is a Knuffke original. Ringing bass intervals and bowing make a soft introduction backed by cymbal textures. Nussbaum gets a tempo started with some added toms. Knuffke enters just before 2 minutes. It's stark and ghostly. He lays out for a while the toms get stronger, and then adds a final line to the close of the tune. I'll leave you to sample this mysterious tune. Track 6, I Surrender Dear, a tune by Harry Barris, Gus Arnheim and his Coconut Grove Orchestra with a vocal refrain by Bing Crosby, recorded this in 1931, and later Louis Armstrong and his orchestra recorded it in the same year. Knuffke captures some of Armstrong's spirit here, but with some delicious soft articulation. Things start out with a loping bass line from Tommy Anderson and fun upward glisses from Jay Anderson. The fun bass change-ups and interplay continue under the cornet melody, so let's hear a sample from where Knuffke enters a little bit into the tune. And let's check out some of Knuffke's exciting solo on this tune as well. The basses get some melodic interchanges from there that are a lot of fun, and Nussbaum gets a solo that has a lot of subtle touches before Knuffke is back to finish out the tune. It's a really great arrangement. Track 7, No Moon at All, by Red Evans and David Mann, first recorded by Nat King Cole's Trio in 1947. Knuffke starts this one out over just Nussbaum's drums. The basses come in with some great interplay underneath, and Nussbaum is up first for a solo on this one with a lot of subtle textures, so let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Tommy Anderson follows with a deep-toned bass solo that's melodic and playful, and Knuffke's solo is playful and inventive, filling breaks with lots of anticipation, and then Jay Anderson gets a bass solo too, with some cool double stops and bluesy licks. Knuffke's back with the melody to wrap things up. Track 8 is another Knuffke original, Song of the Tree. Nussbaum gets this going with a 6-beat rhythm, and the basses join in, setting up a hypnotic groove. Let's check it out from where Knuffke joins in with some primal sound play into Latin-y ideas a little bit into the tune. He lets the groove go on for a while before coming back with some more animated lines to wrap it up. Track 9, Nature Boy, written by Eden Abes, the proto-hippie composer who got this tune to Nat King Cole, who then recorded it first in 1947. It has a mysterious start with soft bass tones of repeated notes into the basses working rubato hints at the melody lines over soft cymbal rolls. Knuffke makes a lyrical and softly articulated rubato exposition of the melody, and also ends the tune that way. Here, it'll be more fun to sample his improvisations over some interesting bass interaction into the tune. And back to the melody from there. It's a really mesmerizing performance of this tune. Track 10, the title track, Super Blonde, from Sun Ra, recorded by Sun Ra and his orchestra on Supersonic Jazz from 1957 on the Evidence label. Knuffke really swings the melody on this one over walking bass from Jay Anderson, who gets the first solo. Knuffke's back for an interlude before Tommy Anderson gets his chance, and the highlight of this one is Knuffke's solo over Nussbaum's drums that really builds up a lot of excitement. So let's check that out later on in the tune. Track 11 is Suddenly It's Spring from Johnny Burke and Jamie Van Heusen from the 1944 U.S. musical movie Lady in the Dark. This has been recorded a lot by Kenny Drew, Stan Getz, Al Cohn, and other famous jazz musicians, but you haven't heard it quite like this before. Check out the beginning of this tune. It's an interesting reimagination with some neat synchronized bass lines along the way. I'll leave you to check out the whole thing. And the recording finishes up with Heaven by David Byrne and Jerry Harrison. It's from the Talking Heads from their 1979 album Fear of Music. If you know the tune, you'll get a smile out of this reimagination right from the infectious bass groove. Let's just hear it. Knuffke sticks close to the melody as a sweet dessert to the interesting program served up over this whole recording. And this is a thoroughly engaging and captivating recording. It defies expectations, starting from the unique instrumentation of two basses, drums, and cornet. And the surprises continue with the program material. Armstrong, Ellington, Sun Ra, and Talking Heads, not to mention Knuffke's originals. It all works because of Knuffke's musical concept and the great musicianship here. You can hear echoes of New Orleans in Knuffke's phrasing and articulation, but his harmonic concept is thoroughly modern, and his solos are continuously inventive. The bass interaction of the Andersons is engaging throughout and constantly surprises you, and Nussbaum's playing matches the sparse instrumentation, never overpowering, but adding lots of texture. The last time we heard cornet and hints of New Orleans, it was from Tobias Wickland's Silver Needle, a recording that we both loved and often revisit, and I think this recording is going to be another one that I'll want to listen to again and again, finding something new to appreciate every time.
Yeah, me too. I echo like everything you just said. In fact, this is almost inevitably, well, you can't really say yet, but it's definitely in the running for my 10 best jazz albums of the year that we pick at the end of the year. I really love this right away. And I think I really like this style of jazz a lot. It's just always immediately appealing. It was interesting and unique right from the start with the basses.
Yeah.
That could be because of the bluesy New Orleans sound or even despite it. It's hard to separate out what makes this record sound original, yet simultaneously traditional. Well, I think we know what makes it sound traditional.
Yeah.
It's all integrated so well, and I have always found the cornet to be expressive with a more sort of old-timey sound to it, or at least that's the way it's often approached by cornetists. It's certainly approached that way here. The oddity here is the two basses. They're separated into two separate channels, and they play off each other and sometimes fill the space in subtly dramatic ways. Sometimes one bass will anchor the harmony while the other creates effects. They're always surprising in their playing together. Even the drum sound on the album is a bit offbeat. The drums are right up front, yet they nevertheless manage to keep a quiet, unintrusive feel throughout. There's an interesting lack of low end to the drum sound. You do hear the bass drum, but it doesn't really boom out or anything. It's kind of low key. So it comes across primarily as sound and not as something you feel, that's kind of pounding on your heart or anything. I found the entire album stimulating, wondering what each track was going to sound like before it came up. And then there were just those interesting choices of tunes, like from especially Heaven by the Talking Heads. I mean, I grew up with music like that.
Right.
The record went beyond expectations. So again, on my list of consideration for the 10 best jazz albums of the year, but I would say hear it now.
Yeah, definitely. A really interesting player with a unique approach. Cast aside sparse instrumentation for the next recording and get ready to be blown away by big sound here at the Mambo Jazz Party from Jonathan Powell. This is on Circle 9 Records. That's Doug Beavers, the trombonist label. This came out August 9th. Born in Largo, Florida, Jonathan Powell started trumpet at age 12. At the North Carolina School of the Arts, he was a member of the group Quantum, which earned the award for Best Student Jazz Group in the Downbeat Student Awards, 1998 and 1999. After high school, Jonathan returned to his hometown to explore the Florida music scene and performed with many groups. In 2001, he moved to New York, and in 2007, he formed the group Nu Sangha, which means community in Tibetan, and released Transcend in 2010 to fusion of rock and electronica-infused jazz. You can also check out their recording Beacons of Light from 2015. He spent 2 decades as a sideman for Latin jazz legends such as Eddie Palmieri, Arturo O'Farrill, Miguel Zinam, Oscar Hernandez, and the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, and Tito Puente Jr., and that experience is going to come out in this recording. And I want to give a special thanks to Jonathan for getting back to me right away and sending the album notes, which helped out a lot with the credits for everything here. So on this recording, Jonathan Powell on trumpet and flugelhorn, Andrew Gould alto saxophone on tracks 1 to 3 and 6 to 8, Jeremy Powell, Jonathan's brother, on tenor sax and flute, Jimmy Bosch on trombone on track 1, Doug Beavers on trombone. He's also track 1 to 8, 11 and 13. Itai Chris on flute, tracks 2 and 11. Louis Fauché, alto sax on the first track. Nir Felder, electric guitar on track 2. Alex Tosca on piano, Fender Rhodes, and synth. I'll point out which tracks he's on later because we've also got the great Manuel Valera on Fender Rhodes and synth on the recording. Luque Curtis on bass, a player we've heard a bit from lately. Camilo Molina on drums and timbales and other percussion. Marcos Lopez on congas, Marcos Torres on congas, Luisito Quintero on bongos and other percussion, Ariadne Trujillo on vocals, Anthony Almonte on vocals, and Jeremy Bosch on some chorus vocals as well. This recording was produced by Jonathan Powell and Doug Beavers. So we can expect some great Latin grooves, captivating arranging, and high-power soloing on this recording. Let's get ready to be hit full force right from the opening track, which is Juancito, and this features Jimmy Bosch. It's composed and arranged by Jonathan Powell. It's an ode to the great Puerto Rican trumpeter Juancito Torres. This features the light-sabered tone of the trombone of Jimmy Bosch starting things out solo, joined by percussion. The horns come in for backing, and then bass and keyboards build in. Let's hear this recording get started. There's a bit more trombone from Bosch, and the horn arrangements keep building excitement. It's going to be hard to really capture all of the intricacy and excitement of the recording in small samples, but I'll do my best. Let's get our first taste of Powell's trumpet with his solo on this tune. Yeah, really hot stuff there, and that's Boucher getting an alto sax solo feature from there with a light intensity and fluidity in his playing. The horn arrangement is back with pulses and trills, building an excitement to a break for Tosca's piano and percussion to get things worked into a full-force solo from Jimmy Bosch. The horns whip up excitement behind him with some final screaming improvisations from Powell before the ending phrase. It's a great opening number. Track 2 is Hope. This is composed and arranged by Jonathan Powell. A busy percussion groove and rising bass figure line are contrasted by legato horn lines with Itai Chris's flute mixed in over a bed of rhythmic Rhodes and guitar lines from Nir Felder. Let's hear the tune get going. There's some really fine arranging there. Powell's up first for a flugelhorn solo. He leaves nice spaces between his phrases, but connects ideas together expertly, getting up high on the way. And well, Latin jazz and flute go together like peanut butter and chocolate, so we must check out Chris's flute solo on this tune. Connecting back to a horn arrangement from there that builds up, Felder gets a reverby and fluid guitar solo next. There's a horn line that blasts to a false ending, but Tosca gets things going again with percolating rhythmic Rhodes joined by percussion, and the whole ensemble builds up again around some high-reaching trumpet improvisations from Powell that continue to a fade-out. Track 3, You're Everything. Chick Corea tune with lyrics by Neville Potter, but here we've got a Spanish translation by Jeremy Bosch, and the arrangement and chorus is by Doug Beavers. This is originally from the Chick Corea and Return to Forever album Light as a Feather from 1973. A little lighter feel on this one. Jonathan's brother Jeremy Powell is on flute in the horn arrangement leading up to the vocal entrance by Ariadne Trujillo. Let's hear it get going. Arrangement builds energy, and Anthony Almonte joins in on the backing vocals. It's a joyful atmosphere, and Powell gets to add some altissimo trumpet improvisations on the way. Track 4 is Butterfly, a Herbie Hancock tune arranged by Jonathan Powell. This is from Hancock's 1974 album Thrust. It's Manuel Valera coming in on piano here with Rhodes on this tune. Powell's trumpet has a lot of reverb and effects, and there's a 70s kind of bell-bottom and afro mood flowing nicely. On this tune, let's sample some of Valera's funky Rhodes solo a little bit into the tune. Jeremy Powell on tenor sax, Beavers on trombone, and Jonathan Powell gets some solo sections and then simultaneous improvisation into a newly energized rhythmic horn section over a throbbing bass line that builds energy right to the end. Track 5, Joe Henderson's Inner Urge, arranged here by Jonathan Powell. It's the title track from Henderson's 1964 recording. Powell has made a great horn arrangement on this tune, so let's check that out for a first sample. Powell's up for the first solo, reaching way up high, and then Jeremy Powell gets to dig in over the animated percussion. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Tosca has a rhythmic and zippy acoustic piano solo. The horns are back with new intricately arranged lines into a piano and percussion breakdown that gets ripping horn lines and some improvisations from Powell to an exciting ending. Track 6, Un Dia Bonito, 2, the intro. This is an Eddie Palmieri tune arranged here by Angel Fernandez. This is from Palmieri's 1973, The Son of Latin Music. So here track 6 is the intro and track 7 is the main tune. On the intro, the percussion get it started, joined by syncopated piano and bass. Horn lines build up to some reverby trumpet from Powell, and the horns work up a rising wail before the end. On track 7, the main tune, a tight horn arrangement and rhythmic piano from Tosca synced with the bass build up the entrance to Anthony Almonte's vocals. Let's check it out. Things build up again to another vocal section. Jeremy Bosch joins in on backing vocals, and Powell gets some trumpet screams. There are more horn arrangement surprises before the vocals return. Powell gets to raise his blood pressure with some trumpet screams before the ending that we should check out before we move on. So let's hear a little bit of that. Track 8 is a Powell original, also arranged by him, Fragwala. It starts out with a tight unison horn arrangement section that gets passed on to piano and bass. Things are really caffeinated on this one with an exciting horn arrangement and then solo exchanges from all the horns. Let's check out some of that horn exchange excitement a little bit into the tune. Tosca follows those exchanges with the piano solo, and the arrangement pushes on full throttle to the end of the tune. Track 9, Alone, Alone, and Alone, by Japanese trumpeter Taramasa Hino, comes from his 1968 recording of the same name on Tact Records, but Blue Mitchell recorded it on his 1965 recording Down With It after meeting Hino, and that's mentioned in the album notes. I remember reading that years ago. Powell gives it a reverby rubato start over dreamy panning roads. It gets a Latin groove with bass and percussion to push things along. Let's hear it get started. Powell uses the reverby echoes as part of the timing and phrasing in his solo in a really tasty way, and Curtis gets an acoustic bass solo on this one. His bass playing has been really impressive on the recording throughout so far, and we heard him recently on Josh Lawrence's Measured Response on Positone Records. Let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Powell's back with a warm-toned and reverby finish to the tune. It was nice to hear this song picked up and reimagined again. Now we've got a couple of tunes, Paramahansa and Yogananda, which was actually a guru's name. Do you know this character, Mike?
Yeah, I think he wrote the autobiography of a yogi, I think. Yeah, that book, it was really popular at a time. It still is, but yeah, at a time it was kind of making the rounds.
He was an Indian-American Hindu monk, yogi, and guru who introduced millions of people to meditation through his organization. And so that's not his real name. Those are kind of titles, I guess, in Hinduism. And so we've got two tunes with each part of his name. So track 10, Paramahansa, means something like Supreme Swan. This is composed and arranged by Jonathan Powell. This starts with a percussion groove, eventually getting joined by snappy acoustic bass, warm synthy washes, and Rhodes before soft horn lines. It all takes a while to build up, so let's sample Powell's fluffy flugelhorn solo on this one a little bit into the tune. Nice lyrical and meditative playing there. Jeremy Powell gets a smooth flowing tenor sax solo too, matching the mood. There's a new horn arrangement section that has some lines showing off dexterity that work into more staccato ideas over a percussion section feature, and then a final melody horn arrangement. And track 11 is Yogananda, also composed and arranged by Jonathan Powell, and I believe this means something like yoga bliss. Valera's back for this one on Rhodes. Let's just sample the beginning that has a fun stacking of the horns before the subdivided rhythmic groove gets going over Curtis's hypnotic bass lines. Chris gets another fine flute solo, and Valera has a Rhodes solo on this one. Powell has a short but energy-packed solo over the busy rhythms in the final section too. Track 12, Juegatón by Frank Dominguez. This has a relaxed tempo with lots of Latin percussion textures as a vehicle for Powell's warm and lyrical flugelhorn and a tasty acoustic piano solo from Tosca. And the recording's going to wrap up with track 13, Totem Pole, a Lee Morgan tune from his 1963 recording The Sidewinder. I'm sure a lot of jazz fans know this tune, and Powell has given it a very cool and fresh Latin arrangement. I'll give you a long sample so that you can hear the whole opening arrangement before Curtis's acoustic bass solo starts. And everyone wants to hear a trumpet solo on a Lee Morgan tune, so since it's the last tune, let's hear one more from Jonathan Powell. Yeah, tricky intervals and harmonic ideas and some impressive high register reaches. It's a very nice solo. Beavers follows with a trombone solo. They take it once more through the melody arrangement and then vamp around for the percussion to build up excitement to a final big blast ending from the horns. Well, there's more than enough for a party here. 13 tracks and an hour and 15 minutes of Latin excitement. First, there's the great arranging, mostly from Powell, but also from Doug Beavers and Angel Fernandez. The material is an intriguing mix of Powell's originals, some Latin favorites, and then Latin reworkings of classic post-bop tunes from Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Joe Henderson, Lee Morgan, and even Terumasa Hino. Then there are the top-notch solos throughout the recording. Powell's impressive power and range get ample display, but are balanced by lyrical flugelhorn numbers, and all the trumpet playing is top-notch. Jimmy Bosch and Doug Beavers on trombone, 3 saxes, including Jeremy Powell, Itai Chris's flute, and piano and Rhodes from both Tosca and Valera. Great percussion and drumming all through, and some standout moments from Luquez Curtis on bass. You'll enjoy this recording on both a cerebral musical level and also in a physical way when the Latin rhythms get your body moving.
Yeah, I also said this is a mambo jazz party that's going to go late into the night. 75 minutes is a really long album, but it's some party.
Yeah, it is.
It's energy really throughout. Even during the pieces named after Yogananda, you would think they'd kind of lay back a little for those and get meditative, but no, it's still a big party. Very clean production on this album for this multi-layered big band. It gets a little reverby at times on the trumpet tone, but it's mostly hard-hitting throughout. As in the party program, we get a few vocal tracks, some solo spots for guest instrumentalists, and a few mellow tracks as well, I guess. Comparatively mellow, let's say. The playing is top rate and ranges from moody to hot. I enjoyed the percussion throughout. It was as varied as the individual tracks, playing different patterns with each and leaving a rhythmic impact that lasts in the mind. I like the use of the Fender Rhodes piano on the album, which you rarely hear in Latin music these days. It sort of lent an atmospheric tone. It was played by Manuel Valera on tracks 4 and 11, and Axel Tosca on the other tracks that it's heard on. They go back and forth, sort of. The lion's share of the solos go to Jonathan Powell, of course, and he shows a lot of variety of tone depending on the mood of the track. He gets a more burnished tone in the ballads while playing hot and uncorking some impressive high notes in the more energetic tracks. It's an exhausting listen in the end due to the length and variety, but you really wind up feeling the way you would feel at the end of a great party.
Yeah, can't beat it for excitement.
There you go.
Put it on next time you've got a party and everyone's going to have a good time for sure. We made it, Mike, our first episode across the world from each other.
Yeah, so there it is. I guess we can eventually separate and go our own separate ways and still do the podcast.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like we're like, Led Zeppelin at the beginning of the song remains the same, where they all come from these distant places to come together to play the concert at Madison Square Garden.
Right. Well, yeah, hopefully this will all come together without a hitch. We didn't have any internet glitches putting this one together, so it was a good experience. And we'll plan to be back again next week on September 2nd with a new episode, but that'll wrap things up for episode 178. We're recording a couple days earlier than usual, and I haven't really made my picks for the next episode because there's so much to choose from.
I've got a lot of choice too, but I've actually got some picks that I made like a week ago that I still want to get to, so I'm going to do those, and then we'll get to the new autumn releases very soon. Autumn releases, I mean, it's still summer, but I think this counts as the autumn releases at this point.
Right. Anyway, I'll make my picks in the next couple days, and shortly after this episode is published, we'll have a playlist up on Deezer, and there'll be a link to it from our Facebook page. But it looks like I'm going to be flying into a typhoon coming back to the mountain lair in Japan.
How exciting.
So, exciting, but maybe some delays involved there. But hopefully I'll be back in time to get the next episode out in time as well. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I haven't been on a plane since 2020, when the COVID started. And
right.
I haven't heard a good story about traveling since that time. So I'm kind of a little nervous about ever getting on one again. I might be stuck here in Japan for the rest of my life.
I've got a bunch of bad stories for you.
Yeah, well, you're one of the many.
Including the first part of this trip. And yeah, I'm not really looking forward to this typhoon coming through. So anyway, we'll give you an update on that for the next episode. And thanks, as always, to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And we'll be back again, hopefully, in another week with episode 179. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.